Hi everyone and welcome back to Parakisgot, our pre-MPDC lecture series. Our specialized lecture for today is entitled Living is Resistance, a primer on the LGBTQIA+ community, presented by me, Giovanni Vallejo, one of the members of the core adjudication panel for the 49th MPDC. So before we begin, let's have a short statement on my positionality. So this lecture was made by me, a cisgender, gay, lower middle class Filipino with a Western queer framework and undergraduate level education not specialized in gender studies. So this presentation was made to the best of my abilities and to the best of my research, but understand that my experiences may not necessarily capture the experiences of every person that I am going to be able to talk about. So take everything with a grain of salt always and understand that my truth does not necessarily have to be your truth as well. So we have three topics for this lecture. First, we have the definition of terms. Second, we have the current situation of the LGBTQIA+ community, not just locally here in the Philippines, but also around the world. And lastly, we can talk about a few relevant LGBTQIA+ issues. First, LGBTQIA+ refers to a collection of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual, and the plus here refers to other non-cisgender and non-heterosexual sexual orientations and gender identities. So for convenience, I'll be using queer to refer to the community. So instead of spelling it out always as LGBTQIA+ community, I might say queer community instead. However, understand that this term, queer, has historical baggage as well because it used to be used as a slur in the past. However, the community is slowly starting to reclaim the word and distance it from its past as being used as a slur. However, you also have to understand that not all queer people are part of the queer community. We are making a distinction here because the queer community has a distinct culture or cultures and shared social movements regardless of where you place yourself politically on those movements and what sort of stance you take on those movements. So if you are a queer person but you are isolated from the community, whether that's because you are isolated from it geographically because you are not surrounded by people who are part of that community, or maybe you don't even engage with the community online, you don't associate yourselves, you don't participate in queer communities that are in social media, for example, or on the internet. So if you live in isolation from the community, it's hard to really say that you are a part of that community because of course a community requires communication. So we can say that you are a queer person, but you are not necessarily part of the queer community. But in this current day and age, most queer people are part of the queer community in some way. I think it's almost impossible to be not engaged with the community with given how interconnected we are right now. So that's just a distinction that is possible, but it's not a distinction that is likely to exist in the present. Next, SOGI-SC refers to an individual's sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, and sex characteristics. So we'll talk about each of those traits later on, but we have to understand that everyone has a SOGI-SC. So this is not something that's just limited to queer people. It's something that everyone has, even if you are cisgender and you are heterosexual, you still have a SOGI-SC. Everyone has a SOGI-SC. So one of the popular ways that Soji SC is described or depicted is the genderbread person by Sam Killerman. So it's a very, very popular way of visualizing the Soji SC of a person. But at the end of the day, even Sam Killerman admits that his depiction and his illustration is still limited by his own experience, and this does not necessarily reflect like what Soji SC truly is, because at the end of the day your Soji SC is a personal experience for you. So we're starting out with a very heavy topic actually. We're starting out with assigned sex or sex assigned at birth. So sex assigned at birth is a category assigned to people at birth based on their sex characteristics. So conventionally, we designate people's sex based on their sexual organs and or their sex chromosomes. So the person's sexual organs is most often referred to as their primary sex characteristics, what your reproductive organs are. So based on your sex organs, someone is male if they have a penis and a scrotum, and female if they have a vagina and a vulva, and the biology that entails that. Alternatively, someone is male if they produce sperm cells and female if they produce egg cells. These are conventional definitions. And based on sex chromosomes, or the 33rd pair of the human chromosomes, people with XY chromosomes are male and people with XX chromosomes are female. But, and this is a very big but, this definition of sex, although it says it's scientific and biological, actually ignores the biological realities of being a human and the plurality of sex characteristics that exist in humans. Because there are people whose sex organs are ambiguous, i.e. they do not match with our conventionally male or female genitalia as designated by scientists, and whose phenotypic sex, or the sex that they appear to be based on their sexual organs and how they develop during puberty, does not actually match their genotypic sex or the sex indicated by their chromosomes, because there are some people in the world who, when we look at them or when we check their birth certificates, it may say that they are a male or they are a female, but when we actually look at their like genetics under the microscope and through machinery, we find out that a man does not necessarily have to have an XY chromosome. There are men out there, or people designated as men, who have complications in their genetics, or women out there who do not necessarily have XX chromosomes. So these people are classified as intersex since their sexual biology does not match our conventional male or female biology, and it's hard to put them in either binary. And estimates of their known numbers, or the people that we know to be intersex and have reported themselves as intersex, range between 0.018 to 1.7% of the population. So it's easy to say that, oh, this is just a small minority of people. These people are probably outliers. But given the number of people on Earth, several billion people, 0.018 to 1.7% of the population is already several thousands to several millions of people. So it's hard to say that that is a small minority or a small outlier. And these are only the people we know. We are not sure that it is possible that there are subtler people with such subtle intersex characteristics that they may not even know that they are intersex until even after their death. So to say that human biology only designates people to be male or female is such a reductive way of looking at things. Moreover, this supposedly biological definition of sex excludes people whose secondary sex characteristics, that is, physical characteristics that we conventionally associate with male or female individuals that are not their sex organs, like their hormone levels, bodily features post-puberty, does not match their assigned sex, like people with abnormal hormone levels, for example. See Caster Semenya, very famous female athlete who was accused of being a man during competitions simply because she had uh, testosterone levels that were higher than the testosterone levels of a median woman. And upon examination, it turned out that Castor had a genetic mutation that caused differences in her sexual development compared to other women. So Castor actually refused to be labeled as an intersex and refused that identity, and refers to herself as a different kind of woman. So we see here that putting people in this male and female binary when it comes to sex based on certain sex characteristics, like really does not actually match with how people experience themselves at the end of the day. And this definition of sex actually also excludes people with disabilities as well, like amputees who may not necessarily have the physical biology that is required for them to supposedly be a man or a woman. And it also excludes infertile people as well if we reduce manhood and womanhood to the ability to say be able to have a child, because not everyone is able to have a child for a variety of reasons. So we see here that reducing sex to a variety of characteristics, associating certain sex characteristics with manhood and womanhood, is highly problematic and is highly reductive as well. So we have to understand that sex characteristics are just that, sex characteristics. And that's just how it is. Human bodies are just that, bodies. As research progresses, we find that our bodies are far more strange, varied, and fascinating than we thought, and that the male-female binary may be insufficient to capture the complexity of human biology, especially when it comes to sex characteristics. So I'm not saying here that there is no value in knowing the biology of a person, in understanding one's own genetics or one's own apparent bodily features, because we also cannot ignore the scientific reality that when it comes to things like healthcare, for example, that your biology does impact how you should be treated and how you respond to medication, for example, or therapy. But what we are challenging here is linking certain sex characteristics to certain identities. Like if you have a penis, you are a man. If you have a vagina, you are a woman. If you have a penis, you just have a penis. If you have a vagina, you just have a vagina. And that's it. Linking your sex characteristics to an identity, I feel, ignores the reality of what the human body is capable of and what human persons can look like inside and outside. Next, gender or gender identity is a category you assign to yourself based on how you envision yourself. Your gender is independent from your assigned sex. So even if your birth certificate says that you were designated as male or female, does not mean that you have to identify as a man or a woman. That's something that you must define for yourself. Your gender is what you say it is. No one else can decide that for you. So there are a variety of genders. First of all, cisgender. So cisgender individuals are those whose gender is the same as the one assigned to them at birth. So if you were assigned as male or female during at birth, then you continue to like see yourself as a man up until the future, even up until you die, then you are cisgender. Cis here meaning same. Next is, in contrast, however, are transgender people or transgender individuals. So being transgender means that your gender is not the same as the one assigned to you at birth. So if you were assigned as a male at birth, but then later on in life, you found out that you are a woman, for example, and that you identify as a woman, then we say that you are transgender. And it does not necessarily mean that uh, being transgender means that you transition to from male to female or female to male. Transgender can also mean that you as an individual were assigned male or female at birth, but you transition later on into a third gender that is separate from the male-female binary. So you may see yourself as non-binary later on, and we'll talk about that later. So that is still counted and seen as a form of being transgender, because you were assigned male or female at birth, but now you identify as someone outside of the binary. Next are gender fluid individuals. So these are people whose gender or combination of genders that they experience changes over time. So this may look like someone who identifies as a woman for a certain period of time, and then let's say after an like an experience or upon reflection, they may find out that they are non-binary, so they change to another gender. Or it is also possible that gender fluid individual may experience their gender differently from day to day. So for today, they may wake up feeling more like a woman, or and then later on, the next day they may wake up feeling more like a man. So gender fluidity essentially is just your gender being fluid like water, not being static, being dynamic. So for how long a person sticks to one particular gender or identifies as one particular gender is something that they define on their own. So we don't have a specific time limit for that. As long as your gender is something that is dynamic and constantly changing, then you can identify as a gender fluid individual. Next, we have non-binary individuals. These are people whose gender does not fall under or cannot be described by the male-female binary. So if you feel that you are a gender that is somewhere in between male and female and you don't want to give that label to yourself, or maybe you see your gender as something that cannot be described by maleness or femaleness or a mixture of both as something else, then you can say that you are a non-binary individual. Next are agender individuals. So agender individuals are unique because while the previous identities may see themselves as a gender, whether that gender is male, female, in between, changing, or outside of the binary, they experience gender in some way. Agender individuals are those who do not experience gender, they do not feel that they have a gender, or they just reject the concept of gender entirely and like do not even care about gender. So that's what being a gender is. It's simply not experiencing gender for yourself or not caring enough to experience gender. So that's what separates it from everyone else, because the previous identities, even if their gender may vary or their experience of gender may vary, they still experience gender, and a gender individual simply does not. Our next term is sexual orientation, which refers to the attraction, and there are two aspects to this, both the sexual attraction and romantic attraction that one experiences towards other genders. So first are heterosexual individuals. These are people who are attracted to people with the opposite gender. So this assumes that there is a male-female binary, and that in a heterosexual identity, you are a man attracted to a woman, you are a woman attracted to a man. And this is what we call conventionally as as straight people. However, we would like to distance ourselves away from calling people as straight or calling one particular sexual orientation as straight, because this actually implies that other orientations are crooked or bent. Now, the problem here is that what we're trying to do is creating a culture of equality between people, a culture of equality between sexual orientations, and implying that one orientation is straight or the right way compared to everything else actually injures the advocacy that we're trying to push forwards, that everyone is equal. So there should not be a straight sexual orientation and everyone else is bent. So we want to refer to people appropriately. That's why we want to distance ourselves from straight and call people who are heterosexual heterosexual instead. So next are homosexual individuals. So these are people who are attracted to people with the same gender. So that can look like a male person being attracted to a male person, a female person being attracted to a female person, and a non-binary person being attracted to a non-binary person. So it just means that you're attracted to the someone who has the same gender as you. It does not have to mean that you are a man attracted to a woman, a man attracted to a man, and a woman attracted to a woman. You just have to be attracted to someone of the same gender. Next are bisexual individuals. So bisexual individuals are people who are attracted to two or more genders. So it means that you are attracted to multiple genders, but multiple does not mean all genders. So this is where pansexual people come in. Pansexual people or pansexual individuals are people who are attracted to all or any gender, Or they can also be gender blind, meaning that their valuation of a person as a sexual or romantic partner does not include thinking about their gender at all. So maybe they're just going to look at the person's physical characteristics or their personality, but they don't really care about the gender that you are. They simply care about who you are as a person. So that is what pansexuality looks like. It's either you're attracted to any and all genders, or that you do not care about gender at all when selecting someone who can be a partner for you, whether that's a sexual partner or a romantic partner. We also have the term men-loving men, or MLMs, which is an umbrella term for all men who are attracted to men, and women-loving women, or WLWs, which is an umbrella term for all women who are attracted to women. So we actually make this distinction and have these definitions because we want to distinguish between MLMs and gay men, and WLWs and lesbian women, because not all MLMs and WLWs are homosexual. Because if, for example, you see a couple with a man-man couple, we do not necessarily assume that simply because a man is dating another man that they are gay. It is possible that one or both individuals is a bi man, or that person could be a pan man. So if we reduce that relationship to a gay man, then it is also possible that we erase the identity that each person in that relationship may have and simply designate them both as straight. So that's why we have the label of MLM and WLW, so that we recognize that even if you are attracted to the person of the same gender, does not mean that you necessarily have to be a homosexual man or a homosexual woman. You can be a bi man, or you can be a pan man or a bi woman and a pan woman who is simply in a relationship or attracted to people who have the same gender as you. So in popular culture, we often hear women loving women being called sapphic women. In contrast, men loving men are called Apollonic men. However, Apollonic is not as often used as sapphic, so you are more likely going to see sapphic in popular culture and popular terminology, but the appropriate or opposite term to sapphic is Apollonic when it comes to men loving men. We also have to recognize that there is a degree of independence between sexual attraction and romantic attraction. So they do not, so simply because you are sexually attracted to men does not mean that you also have to be romantically attracted to just men. So some people actually may be biromantic but heterosexual, meaning that they can be romantically attracted to multiple genders. Like you can be attracted to like men, women, and non-binary people, but you are still like heterosexual. You are still a man who is only sexually attracted to women, but you can be romantically attracted to men and non-binary people, or some combination thereof. So at the end of the day, it's still a matter of you as a person, and it's hard for us to reduce people to their sexual orientations. So just because you identify as a homosexual man does not mean that there's no possibility of you being attracted to women as well, because we make the distinction between romantic attraction and sexual attraction at the end of the day. These things can be independent, and these things do not necessarily have to be the same. In contrast to the people who experience romantic and sexual attraction, we also have people who do not experience romantic and or sexual attraction, or who experience it to a very low extent. So we have asexual individuals, who are people who do not experience sexual attraction, aromantic individuals are those who do not experience romantic attraction, and aroace individuals who do not experience both romantic and sexual attraction. There are also people who have very low sexual attraction, like these people often identify themselves as gray sexual, and those who only experience sexual attraction to a person they have an emotional bond with are people who identify as demisexual. So this is not to say that they do not experience sexual attraction at all, but only that they have to have emotional bond with their partner first, or the relationship with their partner first, before they're able to establish that sexual attraction. So just because you are a part of the Aero Ace Gray community does not mean that you are unable to participate or do not participate at all in acts of intimacy with romantic or sexual partners. There are still Aero Ace and Gray people who participate in acts of intimacy, but they may choose to participate it in reasons that are different from individuals who experience romantic and or sexual attraction. As to what those reasons are, I feel that it would be a bit overstepping my bounds to speculate and say, since I am not a part of that community. But the important thing to note here is that they can still participate in those acts of intimacy, and there are people who still participate in those acts of intimacy. So suffice to say, our sexual irritations are often deeply personal and can change over time, and it's something that really varies from person to person, and a person may not even feel that any of the terms I listed out here as uh, really describing how they are romantically or sexually attracted to other people. So it really boils down to respecting each other's preferences and recognizing that definitions can only do so much and can only describe people so much. Our last term is gender expression, which is how one Soji manifests. This talks about how we dress, how we talk, and how we act, among other things. So classifying gender expression is mostly a product of current and contemporary societal norms and expectations, meaning that if our societal norms and expectations were to change and shift, it is also possible that how we classify people in their gender expression may change as well. So right now, masculine presentation is acting in alignment with what we conventionally and currently consider as masculine, while feminine presentation is acting in alignment with what we conventionally and currently consider as feminine. On the other hand, androgyny is expressing a mixture of both masculine and feminine traits, or having a vibe and personal bearing and sense of style or walking and talking that is so unique that it somehow exists outside of the masc fem binary. So what we have to take note here and like really internalize is that gender expression is an extremely relative thing, and it's extremely dependent on the culture that one exists in, the time period that they exist in, the people that they are surrounded by, because you have to understand that our ideas and concepts of masculinity and femininity, and in consequence as well androgyny, it varies from person to person, from place to place, from time to time, from society to society. So what one may consider as masculine in one particular place may not necessarily be considered as masculine in another place or in another time or in another culture. This may be considered as feminine, or this may be considered as androgynous. So gender expression is very relative. It's just how you move about in the world. It's how you act in the world. It's how you are. So it's a very arbitrary uh, category that we are imposing on people, and it's a very relative category that we are imposing on people. So at the end of the day, it's very reliant on where you are right now, where you live in, and the culture of the world that you exist in. I guess that for a lot of people who are not really immersed in the queer community or know a lot of queer people, that the terminology we use may be overwhelming and hard to internalize at first pass. But it's important to note that understanding human Soji SC is an ongoing, lifelong interdisciplinary pursuit still being done by biologists, neurologists, psychologists, sociologists, philosophers, other thinkers, and us people ourselves. It's okay to not understand at first, because even we queer people do not understand our fellow queer people. I do not necessarily understand all genders, all sexual orientations, all gender expressions. I do not necessarily understand like what your queerness really looks like, how you identify as, because my experience of queerness does not have to be the same as the experience of queerness of other people's, how other people identify themselves. But what we have to put into our hearts and have to really put into our souls is that respect for one another is non-negotiable. And this is not respect because you are a queer person, but this is respect that we should extend to one another because we are fellow humans, we are fellow individuals who are co-equals and who deserve equal rights. So if you have like difficulties understanding the Soji SE of a person, if you have difficulties understanding their gender identity, their sexual orientation, or their gender expression, or like how they identify as, it's just it's just better to ask people themselves and to clarify themselves from a position, from a place of respect and love. So if you don't understand queer people, then go ask, go listen, but most importantly, be kind, be loving, be respectful, because that is still a fellow human person. So that's all for the definition of terms. So I know that was a lot to take in. So let's have a short intermission. Give yourselves like 5 minutes to grab a drink, have a snack, and take a deep breath. So I'm giving you the time to reflect and pause. So we'll resume after this intermission. Now, let's talk about the current situation. Where are we now when it comes to recognizing and protecting LGBTQIA plus rights, not only here in the Philippines, but around the world as well? While steps and leaps are being made towards LGBTQIA plus equality around the world, like for example, the legalization of same-sex marriage in Thailand most recently, here are the facts of the matter. Same-sex relations are still illegal in 66 countries and are punishable by law to varying extents. Cross-dressing is still illegal in 13 countries and is often being used to target transgender individuals. Only 38 countries allow same-sex marriages or unions, and only 39 countries allow same-sex couples to adopt children together. Only 58 countries allow changing one's legal gender, and 28 of those require you to undergo gender reaffirming surgery. And lastly, only 15 countries recognize a third gender besides male and female. So while we are moving towards and making step towards greater queer gender equality, we still see that the situation is very dire for a lot of queer people around the world, and that being queer puts a lot of life being queer may put your life at risk in in many places in many countries around the world. Here in the Philippines, the SOGI bill is an act that aims to decriminalize and penalize SOGI-based discrimination. It was first filed in 2000 but has still not yet been passed until this day. Critics have a lot of objections, and here are three big ones. First, that this would enable the discrimination of cis and heterosexual people, that they would experience a sort of reverse discrimination where heterosexual people would be excluded from the workplace. But understand that the SOGI bill protects everyone because, as we've said earlier, everyone has a SOGI. So everyone should be protected because everyone is entitled to the same SOGI-based discrimination. So this form of reverse discrimination that heterosexual people will supposedly experience is in fact criminalized under the SOGI bill and would be protected by the SOGI bill. Second, that this would somehow legalize same-sex marriage. This is an entirely different debate altogether, and this is nowhere found in the bill. The SOGI bill does not talk about same-sex or the legalization of same-sex in any shape, capacity, or form. And thirdly, that this is unnecessary because the Filipino people and the Philippines are already tolerating and respecting queer people and people who are non-cis and non-heterosexual like in the Philippines right now. But understand that a lot of Filipino queers continue to experience SOGI-based discrimination in various places. They still experience SOGI-based discrimination at home, in schools, in the workplace, in their communities, at the national level. There are still being jokes being made at our expense by politicians, being made by public personalities. So to say that this is unnecessary for the Filipino queer community is an insult to the suffering that is still being experienced by Filipino queers up until this day. More alarmingly, countries around the world which were making headways into LGBTQIA plus equality, like specifically developed countries in the West, are seemingly experiencing conservative backslide and are becoming less tolerant of queer people, or at the very least, that the people who are intolerant of queer people are becoming far more vocal in recent years. This may be the echoes of the culture ideological war as queer identities become increasingly politicized and opinions toward them become increasingly polarized, like it in like earlier years, what happened was that there were a lot of people who were neutral towards their stance on the LGBT community, but as support for the LGBT community has grown over the years, we're also seeing an equivalent increase in the growth of people who are against it. So people who are neutral are like decreasing, but those on the polar ends of support and detractors are increasing. So it's becoming a far more polarized issue. And this is on the realm of speculation, but I believe that this is also due to, since countries right now are like extending more rights to LGBTQIA plus people, to queer people, I believe that this is also uh, essentially reactionaries from the conservative movement trying to push back against the changes being made. I believe that in the past, when changes were being made, these changes were marginal and were like ignorable by the conservative community, but now as more and more rights are being given, as they should be, to queer people, that that the boat, the so-called ideological boat, is being rocked more actively in the current like situation. So they're becoming far more reactionary and far more vocal as compared to previous years where the changes being made were marginal and small at best. So that's speculation on my end. However, what is true is that at the forefront of this conflict is a pillar of our community, the trans community, which were instrumental in advocating for increased gender equality and increased LGBT rights around the world, like in the US, for example, and in the Philippines, for example, because the trans community, while other like SOGI SC identities are able to like more easily blend in, the trans community has historically had a harder time like blending in into cisgender and heterosexual communities, which is why they are the ones who have actively been pushing towards greater rights and towards greater equality, because they are some of the most vulnerable and most marginalized people in our community. A big issue that the trans community is facing right now are TERFs, which are trans exclusionary radical feminists, having air quotes on feminists here, which are radical feminists who believe that trans women are not real women and should not be included in the people that the feminist movement should fight for. So around the world, they're celebrating right now because of the recent ruling of the UK Supreme Court that sex-based protections for women only apply to quote-unquote biological women, or women or people who were assigned female at birth, and does not include women who have legally transitioned, because in the eyes of TERFs, these women are not the real women, so they should be protected from these women as well, which is an insult to the trans community, especially the trans female community who have continually fought for women's rights and who continue to fight for women's rights up until this day, and who have like helped the feminist community in actually advocating for greater gender equality in the past. We also see that some states in the USA right now are banning LGBTQ plus inclusion and SOGI SC awareness to an extent in their public schools educational curriculum. So we have to understand that LGBTQ plus inclusion and SOGI SC awareness are very intertwined with one another, because it's hard to talk about gender identity and sexual orientation when the only thing that you're talking about is male female as a, or male is a gender binary of male and female, and only talking about heterosexual sexual orientation. So having thorough SOGI SC awareness entails and necessitates awareness about the LGBTQ plus community and LGBTQ plus identities as well. So this is not only a hit towards like teaching the next generation of citizens and the next generation of humans that uh, queer people are valid, and that their lives are valid, and that they are co-equals with heterosexual and cisgender individuals in like how they live their lives and how their rights should be respected. But it also is a hit towards how children in younger people are able to discover themselves and really understand who they are, because like cutting off awareness about SOGSC and LGBTQ plus awareness can greatly hinder the capacity of young people to explore themselves and define themselves, and really puts us back into the box of being a cisgender heterosexual and enforcing the heteronormative norms that we have had for so long and that we are continually trying to push back against. So even in the midst of all of these like global issues around the world, even in the Philippines, we're still having debates about who gets to use the bathroom. So the situation is still dire around the world. Given the oppression and hardship that queer people experience on a day-to-day basis, I believe that for a queer person, or any marginalized individual for that matter, that to live and to live with joy is a form of resistance in and of itself. Because when the world says that your life does not matter and it wants to crush you under its thumb, living is resisting, which is why I titled this lecture Living is Resistance. So for those of us who have more power and more privilege, there are still a multitude of avenues to support and advocate for LGBTQIA plus rights and equality. So this can mean organizing in physical spaces and physical organizations, but also in online spaces. We have funds, for example, and like solicitations for people who are queer and who are homeless, for example, because they were kicked out of their families and who need the help in like getting on their feet. There are also institutions out there and organizations who require funding to continue to advocate for queer rights and for LGBTQIA plus equality. So there are a lot of avenues for us to continue advocating for greater rights and greater equality, and the fight is still not over. So the fight for LGBTQIA plus rights and equality is not isolated from the rest of the problems that the world's face. At the end of the day, the fight for our rights is a fight for human rights. It's a fight not for queer people, but it's a fight for people, for humans, and for the rights that we rightfully should be extended as well. To close this lecture, let's talk about a few relevant LGBTQIA plus issues glancingly. So I leave additional research and additional knowledge gathering to you. So we'll talk about three topics here. First is infighting within the community. Second is ethical non-monogamy. And third is LGBTQIA plus terminology and the limitations of that terminology. First, on infighting within the community. So the LGBTQIA plus community is not a monolith. We are not one single person. We are a diversity of people. There are queer people from all walks of life, from all countries, from all ages, from all socio-economic classes, from all jobs out there. So if there are a lot of people, there are also a diversity of opinions on pen political positions on various topics. So my opinions do not necessarily have to align with a transgender woman from India, for example, and those opinions do not necessarily have to align with a non-binary person from the United States, for example, because we live in different social cultural contexts and we have different lives, we have different experiences. But what we are currently seeing right now is that there is a growing ideological divide in the community as well, specifically between more conservative and more progressive members. So I believe that this is also an echo of the culture slash ideological war that's happening right now. So not only is the general public becoming more polarized, I believe that the LGBT community as well is being more polarized, because right now we are also seeing queer people who are allying themselves with conservative individuals who are against increasing LGBTQIA plus rights and LGBTQIA plus equality, but they still continue to ally themselves with those people because they believe themselves to be the exception to the intolerance of those conservative communities. So we're seeing that ideological divide right now. So the community is also fighting within itself. And while it is true that a degree of discourse and debate is healthy and important for any institution or any community, it is questionable to argue about the fundamental rights of others when at the end of the day, we are all individuals who have lacking civil rights, who are not seen as co-equals with cisgender and heterosexual people in the general public, and B, if it is good for us to have so much public infighting currently in this political climate, because at the end of the day, if we want to advocate for uh, increased rights and greater equality, what we don't want to do is to show that we are fractured and that we are not a united front, because it makes it far easier for our opponents to drive wedges between us and to divide us from actually looking at the bigger picture and actually advocating for what we deserve at the end of the day. Next is ethical non-monogamy. So the LGBTQIA plus community is known for being more overt in having non-monogamous relationships, which are relationships where two individuals are not exclusively dating one another. So these relationships include open relationships where one or both partners in the primary quote-unquote relationship or partnership permit sexual or emotional relationships with other people outside of that relationship, and polyamory, where more than two people are in a relationship. So this could be as few as three people, it could be as many as eight people, and so on. So it's a matter of logistics, and it's a matter of finding enough people that you love and who are willing to participate in a romantic or sexual relationship with you. What's interesting here is that although heterosexuals can, and some do, have non-monogamous relationships as well, LGBTQIA plus people seem to be more open to it and have a greater number of people who actually practice non-monogamy. Why is this so? This may be an extension of rejecting societal norms as fundamental, one of which is mononormativity. So, since the queer community is already so used to breaking barriers and breaking social conventions, breaking the social convention of having a monogamous relationship is also like a very easy thing for queer people to do when they're already breaking every other social convention that exists out there. However, we still have to like take note here is that queer people, like everyone else, are free to make choices as to what type of relationship is best for them. So this is not us stereotyping, or this is not me stereotyping that like queer people are like most queer people are in a non-monogamous relationship, or that queer people are not built so somehow for monogamous relationships, but maybe there is just a greater openness to non-monogamous relationships in the queer community, simply because we do not accept it as being the default relationship that a person should have, because we are already accepting that a lot of things that are somehow default for the general public or for the average non-queer person is not something that should apply to us queer people, and not something that we should be taking at face value. Lastly, on LGBTQIA plus terminology. So earlier I said that this lecture is based on a Western queer framework. The current global language of SOGI-SC and LGBTQIA plus concepts, and like even the term SOGI-SC and LGBTQIA plus right now, are largely based on a framework that was developed by the West, in the West, and by Western people. So a one-to-one mapping of those concepts to local concepts may not always be possible, because the concepts that like arose in the Western framework of LGBTQIA plus terminology is not the same concept and context. It's just not the same context that these arose in countries like the Philippines or Thailand or in the Middle East or in India, for example. So let's look at the example of Philippines, where it is tempting to say that bayot or bakla is the same as gay man, and some make that translation. But this reduces the nuance of the term a lot and reduces the complexity of it, because in the Philippines, bayot and bakla can be used by any gay man, but it is more prevalently used by femme gay men in particular, and is also used by some trans women who are trans women but who still identify as being bayot or being bakla. So what happens here is that when we just say that bayot or bakla is a gay man, it reduces the weight and the complexity that the term can offer a native speaker or a native Filipino. At the same time, it can also exclude certain individuals who used to be included in our local definition of bayot or bakla in like this definition of it in the West. So there's a degree of nuance and complexity that is lost when we directly translate our local terminology with Western terminology for SOGSC and LGBTQIA+. What this tells us is that while the Western framework is convenient for global communication, it is also a work in progress that may not always be able to capture the nuances of local queer life and local queer identities. Every definition is a limitation, and it pays to be mindful of what is lost in translation. That's all for my lecture. I hope you learned a lot, and I deeply apologize if you, as a queer person, felt that your unique identity was not able to be discussed in my lecture. So that's a limitation of the primer that's designed for public consumption, but it's also like a showcase of the beauty of the diversity of identities that we have in the queer community as well. I highly suggest everyone to do the reading and research on their own, to look at additional reference materials, and also to do a reflection and investigation on their own, not only about SOGSC, but also about yourself, because a lot of us take our SOGSC for granted, and when we actually do the work, we may find that there are a lot more things about ourselves that we may not yet have realized. So that's all from me. Thank you very much for listening.